Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of The Bullet. My name is Paul Lathrop. I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining me today and for the second day in a row, Alex Ooley of the Ooley Law Offices in Indiana. Also, the man behind the Forge of, or one of the men behind the Forge of Freedom podcast. Alex, thanks for coming along again today, man.
Yeah, great to be with you again, Paul.
I want to start because we really gave your show short attention yesterday, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put in the show notes or in the comments for both Facebook and YouTube. I'm going to put the link for your show, The Forge of Freedom. If you would, tell us a little bit about that, how you came about the idea for the Forge of Freedom and what it's all about.
Yeah, sure. So obviously I'm an attorney. I'm also a firearms instructor, and I think that firearms are indispensable to a free society, but my passion is not just firearms. I'm interested more generally in spreading freedom and spreading the ideas of freedom. And the idea is that liberty isn't won from the government. It's not gotten from the government. It's not given to us by the government. Liberty is won at the individual level. You have to fight for it. You have to fight for it by learning, by being equipped with the knowledge and the skills to maintain it. And with firearms, obviously, are important to that as well. But the idea is that individuals are where liberty is fought for and preserved, and that we, each of us individually, are the forge of freedom. So that's the idea behind the podcast. I'm going to talk about a lot of topics related to freedom and liberty, and kind of how the idea of self-ownership and non-aggression apply to lots of topics we hear about in the news and in our everyday lives.
Okay, and well, I have not yet had a chance. You've got a total of one episode up. I haven't had a chance to check it out yet, but tonight, as I'm putting the finishing touches, as I'm putting this show out on podcast, I'll be listening to it. And oh, by the way, podcast listeners, I'll make sure to include in the show description. I'll include the link for Alex's show as well if you want to check that out. So let's go ahead and get started. We've got a lot of stuff to get to today. As we get started, I want to remind everybody, even though Alex is an attorney, I'm not. And if you need an attorney, consult an attorney in your local jurisdiction, simply because Alex cannot know all the laws across all the land, and we cannot give out legal advice individually over the air. So if you need an attorney, get one, but get a local one. Also, as we go to the main part of the show, if you want to get your comments in, comment on either the live Facebook or YouTube video. If you're watching on the Polite Society podcast channels, if you're catching us anywhere else, go to Twitter, tweet with the hashtag #TheBullet, and we'll get those comments as well, get them on the air, we'll discuss them. Let me get this one up because I want to get this up before we go to news. George wants to know, did we see the write-up about how many government agencies have guns, SWAT teams, etc.? I did not see a write-up on that, George. It's the IRS has SWAT teams. Why does the IRS need SWAT teams? I don't know, but they've got them. There are a lot of federal agencies that have armed officers and have, advanced tactics teams. I think a lot of it's kind of silly, but it's a government. They're gonna grab as much power as they possibly can.
Yeah, likewise, Paul. I didn't see the write-up, but I did see when it was announced that the IRS would be employing 87,000 new agents that one of the job requirements in their job listing was that they be willing to use deadly force. And I assume that means with a firearm. Of course, it could be by other means as well. But
Sure.
that's what the government does. They ultimately, every law is enforced at the point of a gun, and that includes taxes. And that
And
nothing speaks more clearly to that than their job listing.
not only taxes, all the way down to parking tickets. Eventually, if you get enough of them, the police will come with guns to arrest you. And so, yeah, all laws are enforced at the point of a gun. Let's go ahead and one last thing. I had this in a previous show note, and I just updated it because it is important to me. It is, as of today, 752 days to our next inauguration day. I do believe it will not be Biden that is the next president. Will he last 752 more days? I don't know. I don't know that he had the mental faculties on day one in office to handle the office, but in 752 more days, no matter who goes in, it's going to be a better option than we have now. So, let's see here. Excuse me, sorry. Go ahead and get to our first story. This is a press release from SAF out of Bellevue, Washington. The Second Amendment Foundation and Defense Distributed today filed briefs in federal court in Texas supporting their motions for a preliminary injunction and summary judgment in Vanderstock versus Garland, which challenges the ATF's final rule on unfinished receivers and parts kits. The briefs were filed in U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas, and the case was originally bought by two Texas residents, a retailer and a manufacturer. The SAF and Defense Distributed intervened and contend the rule was adopted in violation of the Administrative Procedures Act, named as defendants. And I'm just going to go ahead and skip down here to near the bottom. This is a quote from Alan Gottlieb. The final rule is arbitrary, capricious, and an abuse of bureaucratic discretion. It doesn't appear that the government agencies even attempted to consider Second Amendment factors and data before creating their final rule, which is not compliant with Bruin, which considers such rules to be consistent with consistent with this nation's historical tradition of firearms regulation. Essentially, their final rule is unconstitutional and must be set aside. Alex, I'm going to lean on your attorney expertise here. Could you talk a little bit about this Administrative Procedures Act? If I'm remembering right, I think what that is laws are made by Congress, not by individual federal departments. Am I right, or is that law entirely something else?
Well, so that's the gist of it, yes. So the idea is that, like you said, the legislature is the branch of government that makes the laws, and the administrative agencies that we have, the alphabet soup of agencies, the ATF, the EPA, the IRS, the FBI, the CIA, these are all under the executive branch, and so they can't be involved in lawmaking. They're supposed to enforce the law, not make law. And a lot of times what happens is the legislature, the members of Congress, they're not necessarily experts in particular areas of the law, whether that's firearms or some other area of the law. So they will sometimes designate rulemaking authority to these administrative agencies like the ATF. But the ATF's job is to enforce and implement and interpret the law, not to make new law or to change the law. If the law needs to be changed, it has to be changed by Congress through a legislative action. And a lot of these agencies have gone beyond their rulemaking authority and have effectively changed the law as it was written by Congress. And that's essentially what's going on here in this case out of Texas, where the Second Amendment Foundation has intervened. So the Second Amendment Foundation is basically saying we've got a rope in the ATF. They've gone way beyond the bounds of their authority, and we need to get them under control.
Well, and I'm hoping that they get the SAF gets what they're hoping for, which is a for an injunction and summary judgment. I'm hoping they get the summary judgment simply because a summary judgment in the Fifth Circuit would greatly curtail ATF's power. And let's not forget, ATF has a rule for short-barreled rifles and pistol braces that is supposed to be coming out in the very near future. We'd heard as early as this week, although I haven't seen that happen yet. So if this judgment can come quickly, that might even delay that more.
Yes, yeah, I think you're right, and I'm hopeful that they get a favorable outcome here, because, like Alan Gottlieb says, the court here, or the ATF here, has not complied with the Bruin decision, and because Bruin, like we've talked about on a number of occasions, says that where a law burdens the fundamental right to keep and bear arms, that law has to be supported by the historical text, history, and tradition. And there is no interest balancing. Does it promote some public safety? And is that interest enough to uphold this law? That interest balancing test was explicitly rejected by the Supreme Court in the Bruin decision. And that's what Alan Gottlieb is pointing to here.
All right. I'm gonna get a couple comments in here. Pete over at Gun Website says the pistol brace ruling was released today, and there's the link for it. I did pull that link up in my browser. We're not gonna. I didn't have any time to read this at all before we went live, so it would be. I would not be doing it justice by commenting on it right now. I will look it over tonight and expect it to be on the show that we do at noon tomorrow Central Time. I've had a total of 15 seconds to look it over. Alex has not had that, so I'm certainly not going to ask him to comment on it. But anyway, yeah. So
I'm not superstitious, but of course we'd get it on a Friday, the 13th, right?
Yeah.
The pistol brace.
Yeah. Wow. And I'm not going to be able to get it read in 5 or 10 minutes because it's 293 pages on PDF for what it's worth.
Wow.
Yeah, I got some heavy reading to do before tomorrow at noon. Let's go ahead and let's talk. We're going to move to Illinois. I got 3 stories in a row about Illinois. First of all, I'm going to go ahead and put this link in. I'm going to put the link for Illinois State Rifle Association in on both the Facebook and the YouTube feeds right now. And again, that'll be as well in the description when we release this on podcast. The reason I'm putting that out there is they are looking right now for plaintiffs for the to sue against the just this week signed assault weapons ban in Illinois. They're looking for plaintiffs, and I want to I want to ask this of you, Alex, as an attorney. You ought to be able to speak on this. It is really important if you're going to file suit that you find the right plaintiff, and the plaintiffs have to have standing, and they have to be I hate to say this because it directly goes to New York, but they got to be a good character. You don't want plaintiffs that you're going to have issues with down the road.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the thing is, bad plaintiffs often lead to bad law. And that's why it's so important to find a good plaintiff. And this is illustrated quite well by the Heller case. There were quite a few companion cases and plaintiffs with claims like those brought by Dick Heller when the Heller case started. But a lot of those cases were thrown out because of lack of standing, and Dick Heller just happened to be a law enforcement officer, and he wasn't a criminal who was bringing a claim. He wasn't, he was a respected person in the community, so he was a great face for the case. So that is borne out or illustrated well by the Heller case.
If I remember right, the Heller case didn't even start as the Heller case. He came in, he was one of the original plaintiffs, but he was one of the, I don't know if he was initial plaintiff, but he was early on in, but it wasn't initially DC versus Heller, it was DC versus somebody, or somebody else versus DC. It wasn't Heller versus DC to start with.
Yeah, there were a number of named plaintiffs, and his was just one of the only ones to survive. So it ended up being DC versus Heller. And in fact, there's some interesting history there. The NRA, and it made some sense. The NRA was concerned that ultimately the case would not prevail at the Supreme Court, and they tried to get in the way of the case. But despite their efforts, the Second Amendment Foundation and their attorneys, I think it was Alan Gura and Clark Neely, pushed forward with the case and ultimately prevailed 5-4 at the Supreme Court. Of course, it was not without risk, but it was a risk that, in hindsight, was obviously worth taking.
Yeah, absolutely. And Heller, believe it or not, Heller was not a SAF-sponsored case. We didn't get a SAF-sponsored case up to the Supreme Court until McDonald. That was the first one that was carried by SAF. I'm not saying that SAF didn't have a hand in Heller. It's just it wasn't an SAF case. So, next one. This one's interesting to me. Illinois' prosecutor vows to challenge new gun ban as governor fumes over sheriff's non-enforcement pledge. We talked a little bit yesterday about a number of sheriffs have said we're not going to enforce some provisions of this law. Now we've got some prosecutors that have been saying essentially the same thing. This story is off of the centersquare.com. And going a little bit into the story here, several prosecutors in Illinois have been weighing in as well, some in conjunction with the sheriff or of their county, while others have released standalone statements. Union County State's Attorney Tyler Tripp sounded off with a statement declaring HB 5471 a direct attack on our right to keep and bear arms as guaranteed by the Second Amendment of the Constitution. And while he didn't explicitly state he wouldn't be charging anyone with violations of the law, he certainly hinted at that outcome. If the state's attorneys are against your law, it's a bad law. Because they when they become attorneys for this, prosecuting attorneys, don't they have to, yes, they have to swear to uphold the Constitution, but I think they get their marching orders from the state government. Am I not right?
That's true. Although the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, so when they are sworn in as attorneys, they swear to uphold and defend the Constitution. So there are competing concerns there for prosecutors because they represent the state, but they have a higher order oath to uphold the Constitution. So I think the prosecutors here realize that by enforcing the state law, which they believe to be unconstitutional, that they're in fact carrying out justice by siding on the side of the Constitution. They're not supposed to blindly enforce the law.
Yeah, I was just following orders. Yes. I've never asked you this before, and we've had conversations off the air a lot before. We've even met up in person a few times, but I've never asked you this before. You are an attorney. Did you ever, in the process of becoming an attorney, consider becoming a state's attorney, a prosecuting attorney working for the district attorney's office? Or have you always been, I want to work for the people kind of guy?
So when I was in law school, I interned with a prosecutor's office, primarily because it's a great way to get a lot of experience very quickly. And I considered working in a prosecutor's office once I became an attorney, but I had too many concerns about the way that prosecutor's office were run, the way that the sort of moral qualms that I have with the war on drugs and other laws. So I think that prosecutors' offices can do good work in fighting for victims and for justice. I just don't ordinarily see that that's how they work. So I have decided and prefer to stay on the side of the individual in protecting constitutional rights.
Very cool. One more story we have out of Illinois. This one off of this is off of Yahoo News. Naperville gun shop owner says he's prepared to take on the state over ban on semi-automatic weapons sales. I'm just going to go ahead and read a little bit of this one. A gun shop owner challenging Naperville's ban on assault rifles vows he will fight a new state law that immediately prohibits the sale of semi-automatic firearms and high-capacity magazines. Robert Bevis, owner of Law Weapons and Supply, who joined forces with the National Association for Gun Rights, is suing the city over its legislation, saying they are now preparing a federal lawsuit challenging Illinois' comprehensive firearm legislation signed this week by Governor J.B. Pritzker. They also plan to seek an injunction that would allow the sale of banned weapons and ammunition to continue while the case goes through court. We're very confident we'll get a restraining order, he said. Good luck. I certainly hope that you're successful. I certainly hope you can also maybe partner with other people than Dudley Brown.
Agreed. Indiana has I don't know if it's considered a subsidiary or a companion organization, Hoosiers for Gun Rights. And in Indiana, they say lots of good things, but in the legislature, they often advocate against good laws that promote the Second Amendment rights, or at least are steps in the right direction. And they often oppose the laws because they're not perfect or they're not exactly what we want, but nevertheless, they're steps in the right direction. So I have seen Hoosiers for Gun Rights in action here in Indiana, not necessarily work in a way that's favorable to gun rights.
I might get myself in a bit of hot water, but I'm just going to go ahead and do it because it's the right thing to do. The National Association for Gun Rights in Dudley Brown. I've had a lot of problems with the NRA, mostly because of the person at the head of the NRA. However, the person at the head of the NRA, referring of course to Wayne LaPierre, is 100 times better for gun rights than Dudley Brown or the National Association for Gun Rights is. They are a large part of the reason Colorado is now purple instead of the deep red that they were 15 years ago. A large part of the reason why the magazine capacity limitation went through in Colorado is because of Dudley Brown. It's you were just right. They are so absolute, so you've got to be absolutely with me or you're an enemy. They will put bad candidates up against good politicians and do dirty political tactics to get those people in. Then when the bad candidate gets in office, they don't have the experience to do anything, and bad stuff happens.
Yeah. Yeah, I see them far too often take a stance opposite legislators who are advocating for laws that promote freedom and gun rights, because they're not perfect laws, but they use it mostly, from my perspective, as a fundraising opportunity to take this absolutist position to create some sound bites and hopefully raise more money.
Yes.
But it's really not in the best interest of gun rights.
Well, and I don't know of another organization, including the NRA, where the leader of that organization has a private jet. So, I'm going to go to before I really step in something, I'm going to go ahead and move us off to Virginia. And here's another one I'm going to include a link for. Virginia VCDL put out an email. Attention, Virginia gunners. This is the first gun control bill of the 2023 season is going to come up on Monday morning at 8 a.m. in the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senate Committee Room A and the Pocahontas Building, SB 901. Senator Marsden subjects a gun owner to a $500 civil fine and having their vehicle towed if they leave a gun in an unattended, unlocked vehicle, or the vehicle is locked but the gun is not in a locked compartment or container in the vehicle. This bill punishes the innocent victim of breaking and entering. The car owner should not be considered to be at fault, even if a criminal opens an unlocked car door. Yeah, bad law. Let me go ahead and get this comment in over on both the Facebook and YouTube side. But and that if you follow that link that I just put in the comments, that'll take you to, and you're from Virginia, that'll take you to a web page where you can contact your Virginia legislator. But I've said for a very long time, your car is not a holster. Your gun doesn't belong there. If you're going to have a firearm in your gun, have it in a holster, on your side, at your appendix, wherever. But don't leave a firearm in your car if you at all can. Now, of course, we do have situations where if you work at a place they don't allow you to carry weapons inside, then you're kind of limited there, but please do lock it up. I do not, however, believe it should be a crime for you to have your gun stolen.
Yeah, I agree, Paul. I don't think it should be a crime, and likewise, you shouldn't use your car as a holster, like you said. And if you do have to leave your firearm in the vehicle, make sure it's secured in a locked safe, not just the glove box, not just the center console. Make sure it's actually locked in a safe, so nobody can steal it and commit a crime with it or hurt someone with it, but also so that it can't be used against you, because that's the opposite of the intended purpose of the firearm. You certainly don't want your own firearm to be used against you when you return to your car.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to get a couple comments in here, and I think that's going to be as far into the news as we're going to get today. I've got some more stories, but I'll save them for tomorrow. But let's go ahead and get some comments in here. Going back to the ATF ruling, 500 Magnum says you can't make up a rule and then enforce it as a law. That's what the SAF is suing about. And I agree with you. It's what the SAF is suing about. We'll have to see what the courts say.
Yeah, we don't want to be ruled by administrative fiat, that's for sure, because there's lots of organizations that are already rogue, and we have to rein them back in.
All And then going to the National Association of Gun Rights, Pete says, the org in question raises more funds each year than every org except the NRA. Almost none of it is spent on activism. I'm going to have to get John Richardson's help on this. John is a money guy, has been a money guy forever, and he is great at digging into the specifics of what these places spend their money on. I would honestly love to know what the National Association of Gun Rights spends their money on, because they get in all kinds of money through fear mongering, through really shady tactics, but they don't do a lot in gun rights. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, there are a lot of great organizations out there to help fight the fight for gun rights, and I'd encourage you to choose a different one. The Second Amendment Foundation is wonderful, obviously. Firearms Policy Coalition, I think, does good work. The Gun Owners of America, and even the NRA still does good work too. There's lots of room for improvement there, especially like you said, Paul, because of the current situation with leadership, but they're still doing good work. And I think we need a strong NRA. Hopefully more members sort of realize what's going on there and encourage a change in leadership going forward, because I think a strong NRA is important for the preservation of the Second Amendment.
All right, and I promise we're over time. I promise I will look at this as soon as we go dark. Gun Website says, since you brought up, here's my research on this topic. Minuteman University resources. Yeah, so the long. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I will. I promise. Check that out as soon as we go dark. I'll look that. As a matter of fact, let me open the browsers. Open it in a browser now so I can look at it later. But I will absolutely, wow. Holy I'm just looking. This is going to come up tomorrow. I will guarantee you that. Thank you, Pete. I'm gonna go ahead and look at all this and digest it a little bit. This will come up tomorrow on the Saturday edition of the Bullet. On our way out, Alex, you want to one more time, please, plug your Forge of Freedom podcast?
Yeah, sure. So the Forge of Freedom, it's available on all the most popular podcast streaming sources. It's also available on YouTube and Rumble. I talk about not just firearms, but I will talk about firearms from time to time, but all things related to freedom. Especially, I'm going to talk about a kind of a mixture of sort of evergreen topics, but also current events, and how the principles of liberty apply to things that we talk about day to day, or that we often hear about in the news. So actually, last week was the first episode. I'll be releasing another episode on Sunday. The topic is why freedom. So why is freedom the highest political value? Why should we care about freedom? And then next week, I'm going to be touching actually on the war on drugs, which I mentioned a little bit earlier in the show. So if you're interested in that, check it out, The Forge of Freedom. I hope you like and subscribe and support the show.
Absolutely. Well, that's going to do it for us today. Please do come join me tomorrow at noon Central as soon as I get my calendar up, because my short-term memory is so bad that even though Alex and I discussed it a few minutes ago, I could not remember just now who I've got coming up. Tomorrow is Tom Walls, Dan Wass, and Rob Morse are going to be my commentators for our Week in Review show tomorrow. We'll get to some stories we didn't get to today and the rest of the week, and we'll do our Week in Review. So do join us for that tomorrow, noon Central Time. Until then, everybody, thanks for watching.